I never thought a few flowers could lead to war. But when the HOA decided my mom's garden was a violation of community standards, they turned our quiet neighborhood into a battleground. I remember the moment she received the notice. She was kneeling in the soil, hands carefully tending to a bed of vibrant roses she had spent months perfecting. The garden wasn't just a hobby for her, it was her sanctuary. Every bloom carried a story, a memory, a purpose. She wiped the sweat off her brow, smiling at a new bud that had just begun to bloom. Then, the letter arrived. A neatly folded HOA violation notice sat on our doorstep, delivered with the cold efficiency of an execution order. The words were blunt, emotionless, and infuriating. Your front yard garden is in direct violation of HOA regulations. All non-conforming plant growth must be removed within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action. My mom read it once, then twice. Her face, usually so warm and full of life, hardened. I snatched the paper from her hands, scanning the nonsense they dared to write. The entire neighborhood had always admired our garden. It wasn't overgrown or messy. It was a masterpiece, an oasis of color and life in a sea of bland, manicured lawns. I could feel my blood boiling. This is ridiculous. They can't do this. But my mom just sighed, folding the letter and tucking it into her pocket. We'll handle it, she said, her voice steady but strained. Let's not jump to conclusions. I knew what she was doing, staying calm, being reasonable. She always believed that if you spoke to people rationally, you could find a solution. She didn't know who she was dealing with. The next morning, we walked into the HOA office, a cold, gray building that looked as lifeless as the rules they enforced. Inside, a group of stiffly dressed board members sat behind a long table, their expressions unreadable. The head of the HOA, Richard Calloway, was the worst of them all. A slick, suit-wearing control freak with a clipboard full of rules and a smile as fake as his concern for the community. We received your notice, my mom said, keeping her voice even. I'd like to understand why my garden is considered a violation. Richard barely looked up. Mrs. Carter, the HOA guidelines are clear. All front yards must maintain a uniform aesthetic. Your flower beds, while charming, do not comply with our landscaping policy. Uniform aesthetic? I gritted my teeth. The other houses in our neighborhood looked identical, rows of plain, boring lawns with maybe a single shrub or two. No color. No life. Nothing like my mom's garden. My flowers aren't hurting anyone, my mom replied, folding her arms. They're well maintained, and several of my neighbors appreciate them. Richard adjusted his tie, giving a condescending smirk. Appreciation doesn't override policy. You have until the end of next week to remove them, or we'll fine you $500 per day. I clenched my fists. $500 per day? This wasn't about aesthetics. This was a shakedown. You can't just force us to destroy something that took years to grow, I snapped. Richard sighed, like he was tired of dealing with commoners. If you don't comply, the HOA will take matters into its own hands. A cold chill ran through me. What does that mean? My mom asked, narrowing her eyes. Richard simply closed his folder. Have a nice day. That night, my mom sat by the garden, fingers tracing the petals of her favorite orchids. I could see the worry in her eyes. I don't understand, she murmured. Why would they target us like this? I didn't have an answer. But something felt off. This wasn't just about the garden. It was about control. The HOA wanted power over everyone, and my mom's garden was a symbol of defiance. I refused to let them win. We're not giving up, I told her. We'll fight this. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I appreciate that. But sometimes you have to pick your battles. She didn't know it yet, but I had already picked mine. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery. I bolted to the window and froze. A truck had pulled up in front of our house. 2 HOA workers were standing by the curb, loading plants into the back, ripping them straight from the soil like they were trash. I sprinted outside. Hey, What the hell are you doing? One of the men barely glanced at me. HOA orders. I looked around wildly for my mom, but she wasn't outside. She didn't even know this was happening. They hadn't given us the full 14 days. I grabbed the man's arm, yanking him away from a lavender bush. Put that back. He frowned. Kids, step aside. You don't want trouble. I didn't care what trouble I got into. I shoved him back, fury burning in my veins. You touch one more plant, and you'll regret it. At that moment, my mom burst through the door, her face pale with shock. She looked at the half-empty garden, then at the workers, and then at Richard Calloway, standing smugly near his car, watching everything unfold like a king surveying his domain. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother snap. She marched straight up to Richard, her voice like steel. This is illegal. Richard only chuckled. It's enforcement. My mom's hands balled into fists. And then, with a deadly calm voice, she said something I had never heard from her before. You're going to regret this. Richard raised an eyebrow, amused. Oh? And why's that? My mom took a deep breath. Then, with quiet authority, she said, Because I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter. And I guarantee you have no idea who you just messed with. Silence. Richard blinked. The workers stopped in their tracks. That's when I realized he had no idea. He thought my mom was just another housewife with a gardening hobby. He didn't know that she was a world-renowned botanist, one whose name carried weight in government environmental boards and academic circles. And now, he had declared war on the wrong woman. I had never seen my mother so furious. She was usually the calm, collected type, the kind of person who could defuse an argument with a level-headed response. But this was different. This wasn't just some HOA rule. This was personal. And Richard Calloway, smug and self-satisfied, had no idea he had just woken a sleeping giant. After the unauthorized destruction of my mom's garden, I couldn't sit still. Something wasn't right. The HOA claimed this was about neighborhood uniformity. But I knew better. Why was my mom's garden such a problem? I spent the rest of the day doing what I did best, digging for dirt. I started with the HOA rulebook. Every neighborhood had its own set of guidelines, and while some had landscaping restrictions, I couldn't recall any mention of a complete ban on flower gardens. I found the digital copy on the HOA's website and scanned through every single page. And there it was, Section 14.3, Approved Landscaping Guidelines. Homeowners may maintain flowers, shrubs, and decorative plants so long as they do not obstruct pathways or become invasive to neighboring properties. I read it again. And again. Nowhere did it say that a well-maintained flower garden was prohibited. So why was Richard so eager to shut us down? That's when I noticed something strange. Section 14.3 had been revised. The original guideline, dating back 5 years ago, had much looser restrictions on landscaping. In fact, it had even encouraged homeowners to beautify the neighborhood through well-maintained gardens. But in the most recent amendment, there was a vague, newly added clause. The HOA reserves the right to determine if a garden or landscape design disrupts the overall aesthetic harmony of the community. That wasn't a rule. That was an excuse. A loophole designed to target specific homes. And if there was one thing I knew about corrupt HOA boards, it was this: they don't make new rules unless someone benefits from them. I needed to dig deeper. I spent hours searching through public property records, HOA meeting notes, and anything else I could find. I even reached out to a few neighbors who had lived in the community for years. One of them, a retired teacher named Mrs. Henderson, mentioned something that immediately set off alarm bells. I don't know what's going on with the HOA these days, she sighed over the phone. But ever since that real estate developer started sniffing around, things have been changing. I sat up straight. Real estate developer? Oh yes, she said. A few months ago, some fancy developer started showing interest in our neighborhood. I think they want to buy up some of the houses and build something new. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. A developer? Buying property? I quickly searched the latest property transactions in our area. And sure enough, over the past 6 months, several homes had been bought out at premium prices. And guess what? Every single home that had been sold had first been targeted by the HOA for some kind of violation. They were forcing people out, racking up fines, pushing them to sell, then handing the properties over to developers for a huge profit. I clenched my fists. This wasn't about flowers. This was about money. And my mom's house? It was next on their list. I ran downstairs, practically tripping over myself to find my mom in the garden. She was kneeling in the dirt, trying to salvage what was left of her orchids. "Mom!" I panted, holding up my laptop. "You need to see this." She stood up, brushing the soil off her hands. I quickly pulled up the property records, HOA meeting minutes, and real estate transactions. As she read through them, I saw her expression shift. At first, confusion. Then realization. Then anger. I took a deep breath. They're not just trying to get rid of the garden. They're trying to get rid of us. My mom was quiet for a long moment. Then, she slowly closed the laptop and looked me dead in the eye. "Then we're going to make them regret it." A shiver ran down my spine. When my mom said something like that, she meant it. That's when I remembered, she wasn't just a woman who loved gardening. She was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a world-renowned botanist. And she had connections in very high places. That night, my mom made a phone call. She spoke in a calm, measured tone, but I could tell from the fire in her eyes that this was war. "I need to speak with the director of the State Environmental Protection Agency," she said into the phone. "Tell him it's Evelyn Carter." Pause. Then she smiled. "Oh, he'll want to hear this." I didn't know exactly what she was planning, but I knew one thing for sure: the HOA had no idea who they had just messed with. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, we would start fighting back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my mother in the kitchen, speaking into her phone with calm but dangerous precision. "Correct. Yes. The HOA has been systematically targeting homes with high-value property," she said, pacing near the window. "And I have evidence that they're doing it under the guise of landscaping violations." I didn't know exactly who she was talking to, but judging by her tone, it wasn't good news for the HOA. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod, her way of saying, "Don't worry. I've got this." But I wasn't going to sit this fight out. I grabbed my laptop and went straight to work. If the HOA wanted a battle, we were about to give them one. The first thing we needed was support. HOAs thrive on fear and compliance. They rely on residents being too scared to challenge them. But what happens when that fear is gone? They lose their power. I started by creating a private online group for residents who had been harassed by the HOA. I titled it, "Police Car Light HOA Abuse, Stand Up for Your Rights." Police Car Light. I posted everything I had found, the shady real estate deals, the revised landscaping rules, and how every single targeted homeowner had been pressured into selling. Within hours, the group had dozens of members. And the stories they shared? Infuriating. One woman had been fined $1,000 for having too many garden gnomes. An elderly couple had been threatened with foreclosure over a minor fence repair. Another homeowner, who had refused to sell, had been fined so aggressively that they were forced to move out. The HOA had been running a scam for years. And now? Now the entire neighborhood knew. It was time to go public. I drafted an email and sent it to every local news station, newspaper, and investigative journalist I could find. Subject: HOA corruption, families being forced out for profit. Hello? My name is redacted, and I have uncovered a massive abuse of power by our local HOA. They are systematically targeting homeowners, forcing them into violations, and pushing them to sell, only for the properties to be resold to a private developer. I have documents, testimonies, and records proving this scheme. Please contact me if you're interested in bringing this corruption to light. Best. Redacted. I clicked send. Now, All we had to do was wait. While I was handling the digital warfare, my mom was preparing for something far bigger. She had spent decades building a reputation in the scientific community. She had worked with environmental agencies, universities, and even the Department of Agriculture. And now, she was calling in every favor she had. Her biggest weapon? Her garden wasn't just a collection of flowers. It was a legally protected ecosystem. Some of the plants she had grown were rare species. Others had been part of botanical research projects. And one particular flower, a rare hybrid orchid she had cultivated herself, was on the list of state-protected plants. Which meant that when the HOA destroyed her garden, they violated state environmental laws. And that was a crime. That afternoon, we heard a knock at the door. Standing outside was a state environmental investigator. My mother greeted him with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming. I reviewed your report," he said, flipping through his notes. "And if what you're saying is true, the HOA is in serious legal trouble." He took photos of the uprooted plants, collected samples, and documented everything. And then, the best part, he headed straight for the HOA's office. Richard Calloway wasn't expecting a visit from the state government. But by the time the investigator left, he looked pale as a ghost. The next morning, I woke up to an email notification. Loudspeaker breaking news. Local HOA accused of corruption and environmental violations. A journalist had picked up our story. And not just any journalist, a major local news anchor. They ran an article exposing everything. The illegal fines, the forced sales, the real estate developer connections. And best of all? The HOA's phone lines were flooded with angry residents demanding answers. By the afternoon, Richard Calloway was losing his mind. He sent out a desperate email to all homeowners, claiming that the accusations were baseless lies spread by a disgruntled homeowner. But it was too late. The damage was done. The state investigation was underway. The news was everywhere. The residents were furious. And the cherry on top? The HOA's board members were turning on each other. That night, my mom and I stood in our backyard, looking at the ruins of her beloved garden. She let out a deep breath. "We're not done yet," she said. "No," I agreed. "Not even close." Because the real fight? It was just getting started. The HOA had been backed into a corner, but they weren't going down without a fight. After the news article exposing their corruption went viral, Richard Calloway, the HOA president, tried to go into full damage control. First, he sent out an official statement to all the homeowners, claiming that the accusations against the HOA were misunderstandings, and that they were simply trying to maintain the neighborhood standards. Then, they called an emergency meeting, hoping to silence the growing backlash before it spiraled out of their control. But they had no idea what was coming next. Because my mom and we were ready to end this once and for all. The emergency meeting was set to take place in the HOA's community hall, an old, overpriced building that homeowners were forced to pay for through their fees. By the time my mom and I arrived, the room was already packed. There were dozens of residents, many of them frustrated, angry, and demanding answers. The energy in the room was tense. At the front of the room sat Richard Calloway, along with a handful of nervous-looking HOA board members. He cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he began, forcing a smile. "I know there have been some concerns lately. But I want to assure you all that—" I cut him off. "Are you going to explain why you've been illegally fining homeowners and forcing them to sell their properties?" I said loud enough for everyone to hear. The room erupted in whispers. Richard's fake smile twitched. "Now, I don't know where you're getting this nonsense, but—" I pulled out my phone. "Really? Because I have documents proving it." I turned on the projector. And then, right there, on a massive screen for everyone to see, I displayed the evidence. Emails from HOA members pressuring residents to sell. Financial records showing the board's connection to a shady real estate developer. Proof of fraudulent landscaping violations. As I flipped through the slides, gasps filled the room. You've been scamming us this whole time? Someone shouted. This is disgusting, another person said. Richard's face strained of color. This is slander, he barked. You can't just. Then my mom stepped forward. You also violated state environmental laws when you destroyed my garden, she said, her voice steady but firm. She placed a sealed legal document on the table in front of Richard. The state has launched an investigation into the HOA's actions, she said. And from what I understand, it doesn't look good for you. Boom. The entire room exploded with outrage. Richard panicked. This is absurd. I didn't know. But it was too late. One of the board members, a frail-looking older woman, stood up suddenly. I'm done covering for you, Richard, she snapped. Everyone turned to look at her. I told you we shouldn't have targeted homeowners like this, she continued. I warned you that this would come back to bite us. Richard's mouth fell open. Margaret, what are you? I quit, she said, throwing her HOA badge on the table. And just like that, the first domino fell. Within minutes, 2 more board members followed. I'm not going to jail for this, one muttered, shoving past Richard as he stormed out of the room. Richard was losing control. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the one in power anymore. We were. I turned back to the crowd. We have enough proof to take legal action against the HOA, I said. But we need the support of the homeowners. One by one, people started nodding. A man raised his hand. How do we file a motion to dissolve the HOA? My mom smiled. Funny you should ask, she said, pulling out a prepared petition. It only took a few minutes for signatures to start piling up. In less than an hour, over 80% of the residents had signed. Richard was finished. He sat back in his chair, defeated, pale, and silent. The HOA was collapsing right before his eyes. And there wasn't a thing he could do about it. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The local news aired an exclusive segment on HOA corruption and illegal homeowner fines. Social media was flooded with posts exposing Richard Calloway's shady dealings. A state attorney announced that a formal investigation into the HOA's finances was underway. And the best part? The petition to dissolve the HOA had gained so much traction that a judge was forced to review the case. Richard tried one last desperate move. He called a lawyer and tried to fight back. But when the evidence was that overwhelming, there was nothing he could do. A few weeks later, a final ruling came down. The HOA was officially dissolved. All unjust fines were cancelled. And Richard Calloway? He was being investigated for financial fraud and abuse of power. My mom and I stood outside in our backyard, watching as construction crews began restoring her garden. She looked over at me and smiled. They thought they could take away my passion, she said. But they didn't realize who they were messing with. I chuckled. They do now. Because at the end of the day, justice had been served. And my mom's garden would never be destroyed again. The HOA was gone. Richard Calloway had been publicly exposed, legally crushed, and financially ruined. But there was still one final victory left. My mom's garden. The very thing they tried to erase. The very thing they thought they could destroy. It was time to bring it back. The day after the HOA's official dissolution, our front yard was still a barren wasteland. Where once my mom's beautiful flower garden stood, there was now only dirt and debris. It should have been a painful sight. But instead, my mom looked at it and smiled. They thought they could erase it, she murmured, kneeling and running her fingers through the soil. But they didn't understand something. I raised an eyebrow. What's that? She turned to me, eyes filled with determination. You can't destroy something that's meant to grow. I felt a swell of pride. Because after everything the HOA did to her, she never let them break her spirit. And now? It was time to rebuild. Within days, something incredible happened. Our neighbors, the same ones who had been terrorized by the HOA for years, started showing up at our house. Some brought flowers, seeds, and young plants. Others arrived with shovels, mulch, and watering cans. Even people we barely knew came by, offering to help. It wasn't just about restoring the garden. It was about sending a message. The HOA tried to control the community, tried to dictate what people could and couldn't do. But now, the community was fighting back. As word spread about our fight against the HOA, something unexpected happened. A local news crew showed up at our house. They wanted to do a follow-up story on what happened after Richard Calloway's downfall. And let me tell you, seeing his name plastered across the evening news felt amazing. Investigators had uncovered shady financial transactions between the HOA and local developers. Lawsuits were being filed by multiple homeowners demanding compensation. The entire town knew exactly what the HOA had done, and no one was on their side. But the best part: Richard Calloway, the smug, arrogant man who thought he was untouchable, was forced to issue a public apology. There he was, standing on live television, sweating bullets as he read from a prepared statement. "I deeply regret any distress caused by the actions of the HOA during my leadership," he mumbled. I nearly burst out laughing. Because you just know he didn't mean a word of it. But it didn't matter. His reputation was in the gutter. His power was gone. And we had won. 2 weeks later, my mom's garden was fully restored. But this time, it was bigger, better, and completely untouchable. Why? Because the mayor himself stepped in. After seeing how much support my mom received, he made a public declaration. Her garden would be officially recognized as a protected landmark. That's right. The very thing the HOA tried to destroy was now a permanent part of the neighborhood. No one, not another HOA, not another corrupt official, not anyone, could ever touch it again. And the best part? At the grand reopening event, as my mom stood in front of her garden, cutting the ribbon with the mayor beside her, the entire neighborhood cheered. The people who once lived in fear of the HOA were now free. And all it took was one woman's determination. And a fight they never saw coming. That night, as we sat on the porch, looking out at the blooming garden, my mom turned to me. "You know," she said, "I never wanted a fight. I never wanted enemies." I nodded. "I know." She smiled, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. "But if someone tries to take what's rightfully yours?" Her expression hardened. "You fight like hell to take it back." I grinned. "Damn right. Because at the end of the day, the HOA thought they could erase my mom's passion. But instead, they made sure it would never die. And her garden would bloom forever."